Hello, Mech Warriors. I'm Major Still Radioactive, Executive Officer and Tactical Officer of the 22nd Argyll Lancers, and this is your Armed Forces Federated Sons tactical brief on defense of Boreal Vault. Please note this brief is classified and is for internal distribution only. Please distribute this brief only to drop commanders within Armed Forces Federated Sons units. The purpose of this brief is to identify tactical assets for use in defense, to identify likely enemy assault strategies, to assist unit commanders in tactical operations on Boreal Vault, and to stop the Zerg rush in its tracks. Tactical assets available to you on Boreal Vault include gates and choke points. These are used to funnel enemy forces into confined areas, with which it's easier to focus fire and down one mech at a time. Terrain on this map includes long sight lines and large areas with very little cover. Use this to your advantage. Dropship fire will be available to you during respawns, and there is one essential point of defense. Here I have highlighted areas of turret fire. You'll see in D5, E5, E4, E6, and G5, I've highlighted areas in yellow. These are primary engagement areas if you wish to utilize turret fire. While you have turrets active in these areas, it is advantageous to you to engage the enemy in these areas if possible. You will also notice areas highlighted in green in G7, F8, and G8. These are secondary turret fire areas. The turret fire is strongest in these areas, however, fighting in these areas is dangerous due to their proximity to Objective Omega. Here you will see certain terrain features of Boreal Vault. You'll notice in E4 and D4, there is a pass in the center mountains. This pass can be utilized by attackers to switch from one side to another once they have your attention drawn to one side. It can also be used by particularly aggressive defenders who wish to stop the enemy at E3 and D4. Please note this is an advanced tactic and should only be utilized by units that are used to aggressive pushes. If this is not your style, please do not try it because it will fail spectacularly. Also notice avenues of approach that have been highlighted by yellow areas, or yellow arrows in E6, E7, F6, and G5. These avenues of approach are lower than the surrounding terrain and offer concealment for light mechs. Any light mech that has escaped your attention and made its way into the base can use one of these avenues of approach to sneak up on the objective. Here you see sight lines. You'll notice sight lines highlighted in yellow for primary engagement areas. If you have a brawling build consisting of mostly medium pulse lasers, medium lasers, or large lasers, you'll want to stack up on the low hill in F6 and behind the tanks in E5. These offer you excellent coverage of the entries from the gate areas. If you have a drop deck with primarily ER large lasers, LRMs, or Gauss rifles, you'll want to stack up on the F6 hills, low and high, and fire on the D4 and F4 hills that the attacker utilizes. You'll also notice secondary sight lines highlighted in green. These are for use after an attacker has pushed towards the tanks in E5. These areas in E6 and G5 offer particularly good coverage of enemies hiding behind the tanks. Here you will see three areas highlighted in yellow circles. These are areas with excellent dropship fire. These are also our spawn points. These areas are particularly useful if you are expecting a respawn. However, please note these areas do nothing for you in event of a Zerg rush, as the Zerg rush commander will try to not eliminate any of your mechs to avoid triggering a dropship. And here you see the essential area of defense. This is the area that the enemy will try with all of their might to get their forces into, as it's the only area from which you can fire on Objective Omega. Please note, even if all defending mechs are lost, if Omega is intact at the end of 30 minutes, the battle is won. I've identified 6 likely enemy assault strategies. I'll go over D4 F4 trades, E5 tanks, the E7 channel run, turret clearing, the Zerg rush, and the hybrid rush. Here you see D4 F4 trades. The areas in the circles are the areas in which the enemy will stack up with their long-range mechs. These include King Crabs utilizing their energy hardpoints, Raven 3Ls with ER large lasers, Jaeger mechs with Gauss rifles, and Thunderbolts with ER PPCs utilizing a 40% velocity quirk. You will see that these commanders have excellent sight lines towards the tanks in E5 if utilizing their forces in F4, the gate area in E6 if utilizing their forces in D4, and the F6 hills from both of their forces. The way to counterplay this strategy is to simply have your forces fall back into E7 and G6. If you do this, the enemy will be forced to come towards E5, where they do not have as advantageous sight lines or terrain. Here you see the second part of that, the E5 tanks. Enemies with brawl builds will try to push towards the E5 tanks, and enemies with long-range builds will be forced towards the E5 tanks if you play them correctly. You'll notice that the sight lines coming off of the E5 tanks have been highlighted in 2 separate colors. This is because the attacking commander is forced to choose which side he will concentrate on. The cover is not sufficient to protect his forces from both sides. He can either fire on E6 F6 or G5 F6, but not both. The ways to counterplay this depend upon your enemy's builds. If the enemy consists of brawlers, you'll want to split your forces between E6 and G6 and fire from range, denying them the ability to properly use cover. If they have long-range builds and you have forced them to the E5 tanks, this is the perfect opportunity to counter-push and brawl with them behind the tanks in E5. Here you see the E7 channel run. This terrain, as noted earlier, gives concealment but not cover to an attacking force. It's also filled with anti-mech barriers. You will notice the area highlighted in yellow as their approach path, and the areas highlighted in purple as intercept points. The first intercept point at the boundary of E6 and E7 is where you will intercept assault mechs. E7 F7 is where you will intercept fast heavies and mediums. And G8 is where you will intercept lights. Please note, if your opponent has a mixture of all 3, you will need to cover all 3 areas, because any light that sneaks by is a major threat if they get on top of Omega. Here you see turret clearing. In this strategy, the attacking commander will queue his forces in D4 and D5, and attempt to draw as many defending forces into E5 to exchange with them as possible. This serves to draw attention to the forces that they have in D4 and D5 that are being used as sacrificial lambs, while long-range light mechs with ECM, such as Spider 5Ds and Raven 3Ls, sneak through F5 into G6 and clear the turrets in our base for a future push. This enemy strategy relies on stealth. If you can detect the enemy's ECM light mechs, you can foil this quite easily by swarming them with mediums. Here you see the Zerg rush. This is one of the larger threats that you will face. The Zerg rush will be executed in the first 2 minutes. The enemy will push D3 all the way to F5 and then immediately hook right through G5, and then use the low routes of concealment to get behind Omega in G8. If properly executed, the Zerg Rush can end the battle in under 2 minutes. And here you see the Hybrid Rush. This is a particularly insidious strategy utilized in the middle of combat, and can be executed with as little as 4 properly fitted light mechs. You'll see the area highlighted in yellow. This is where 2 lances of enemy heavies and assaults will push towards and then attract as much attention as possible, while 4 light mechs go up E4 through G5 towards the objective in G8 while the battle rages. They will attempt to stand in the cubbyhole between the gun and generator and destroy the generator at that point without engaging the turrets. I'll now go over how to stop the Zerg Rush. Information and familiarity with stopping the Zerg Rush is crucial to our success on this map. Scouting and rapid response will be vital, and you will follow a specific playbook or you will fail. Your mediums and fast heavies and assaults will return to base immediately. Lights will run with the enemy team and attempt to leg the front mechs. The lights are there to cause as much chaos in the enemy team as possible and prevent them from hitting the base simultaneously. This allows turrets to focus on one mech at a time and down the attackers as they come into the base. Your assaults must be properly staged before the rush. Any assaults that are deployed too far forward at the beginning of the rush will be useless. If you find any assault mechs on your team deployed too far forward when a Zerg Rush is coming in, have them eject. They will be worthless in the battle otherwise. Ejecting will trigger a second wave of mechs which will spawn on top of the enemy attackers, as well as dropship guns, which will be vital to stopping the attackers. And the most important thing to remember, leg them and leave them. You take one leg off of an attacking mech and it ceases to be a threat. You then focus fire on the next attacking mech. I've highlighted your staging areas for standard defense of Boreal Vault. You'll notice the E4 and D5 gates I have highlighted with small circles. These are areas that you want to deploy a jump jetting light mech to. The preferable mech for this is a Spider 5D. This mech's purpose is to determine the composition of enemy forces coming towards you. Once you attain that information, you can plan your defense accordingly. Until you have that information, you need to keep your mediums and fast heavies between the hills in F6, while your assaults stay in F7 and G6 for rapid return to the base. Once the Zerg Rush is identified, your scouts will fall back behind the tanks in E5. They will then wait for the Zerg Rush to cross the gate and begin to run with them. Your mediums and fast heavies will deploy towards G6. There they will be augmented by turret fire in legging the enemy mechs, and your assaults will immediately return to base. I've highlighted the Zerg Rush path in green. You'll note the standard Zerg Rush path goes through F4, F5, G5, G6, and G7 toward the back of the objective. In yellow, I have highlighted with arrows your scout mech's path. They are to run in the middle of the pack of enemy lights. If your enemy is well coordinated, they will not return fire on your lights because they don't want to waste heat that can be utilized destroying the generator. Thus, your lights are free to wreak as much havoc as possible without taking much return fire. You'll see in purple the route that your mediums and fast heavies will take. Once the enemy lights reach the tanks in E5 and your lights merge with their pack, your mediums and heavies will begin a firing retreat towards the G7 H6 corner. From there, they will merge with the pack and follow them towards the objective. Please note, approximately 8 seconds before the enemy reaches the objective en masse, you will begin spamming artillery on their staging point in G8. You'll also notice areas highlighted in yellow circles in G7 and G8. These are the staging areas for your assault mechs. They're too slow to play dynamically and must wait there for the battle to come to them. If you memorize this play, you will be able to stop the Zerg rush on Boreal Vault. You will be able to take planets and defend the territory of the Federated Suns. So remember, strike fast, hit hard, for the glory of the Federated Suns. Good luck, Mech Warrior.